Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where we are racing towards 1,800 interviews. Where has the time gone? And I think in that time we have covered just about every angle on the topic of cybersecurity. But today I want to talk about the role of the CFO. Because the CFO role has been emphasised more than ever over the last 15 months. And while reducing fear and uncertainty amongst employees and investors has always been a part of that job description, it suddenly became a major focal point during the pandemic. And I think it was that intense focus that led to a complete transformation of the role, and indeed finance and a CFO within many organisations, ultimately elevating it from a purely technical position to become change agent within the company. So today I've invited Danielle Murcray, CFO at a company called AttackIQ, onto the podcast, and she's going to join me to share her first-hand experience of how her role as a startup CFO has shifted to a far more strategic partnership with the CEO and the board, all while playing an integral role in shaping the adoption of more innovative technologies that can aid in the security and prosperity of an increasingly distributed enterprise. And as I said a few moments ago, we've covered just about every topic on cybersecurity, but I'm quite excited to get Danielle on today because this is a completely fresh angle. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Montana, where Danielle is waiting to join us in conversation, and we'll talk about all this, her story, and much more. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. So I have been a CFO for over 10 years, and I specialize in cybersecurity, but I've been in accounting and finance for almost 25 years. For the last 2 years, I've been the CFO at AttackIQ, where I run finance, accounting, HR, talent acquisition, and sales operations. And I just moved to Northwest Montana last November, but I'm a native Californian.
Excellent. And as you're talking there, listening about your story in finance, cybersecurity and technology, I've got a feeling there's going to be a bit of a story there. So can I ask that you share your origin story of where your passion for tech came from and how all those worlds collided to put you on the path you're on today?
Yeah, absolutely. So believe it or not, I actually knew from my freshman year in high school that I wanted to study accounting in college. So it's a great career for women, and it really gives you the opportunity to choose what industry you want to work in. So my first job was Arthur Andersen in the Silicon Valley office in San Jose, California. So I was fortunate to have joined the firm during the time where many tech companies were going public. So my primary focus was auditing those companies and getting exposure to all different kinds of technology. So I specifically, though, fell in love with security and startups back in 2005 when I joined a company called Ironport Systems. It, at the time, was the leading provider of email and web security. And what I loved about it is I felt like I was making a difference working for a company that was trying to stop bad actors back in the early days of security. I really love that. And Ironport was also my first startup. It ended up being acquired by Cisco Systems. But once I got that feel of being part of a startup and building something and taking something from scratch and seeing it scale, I've been the CFO at several successful security companies, 2 of which were acquired by Palo Alto Networks and another one by McAfee. And what I love about security is that the need will never go away.
Love that. And of course, that path led you to AttackIQ, where you are currently the CFO. And I think that role has universally been emphasized more than ever, especially over the last 15 months. And while reducing fear and uncertainty amongst employees and investors has always been a part of the description, I'm curious, how has it become a bigger and a more major focal point during the pandemic? Are there any big changes that you've seen?
That's a great question. From my perspective, in the beginning of the pandemic, no one had any idea how long it was going to last and what the buying behavior of customers would be. And so there's this mad sort of scramble to figure out what our business model was going to be, and I think I ran over 30 different scenarios, which is crazy. I've never done that in my entire career. So I immediately shifted my focus to liquidity in the company, financial stabilization, and trying to drive whatever operational efficiencies that we could. And this was just to make sure that the company remained on sound financial footing, so that this helped reduce the fear and uncertainty that the pandemic brought, both professionally, but also personally to our employees and investors.
And it does seem that this intense focus has led to a complete transformation of the role of finance and the CFO within so many organisations. It's something we're seeing more and more now. But how have you seen that role evolve?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about the shift sort of earlier in the pandemic, but now that we're in the second year of the pandemic and seeing even sort of an increase with the Delta variant, my focus has actually continued to shift. And I believe that I'm being looked at as more of a strategist and change agent on the executive team versus maybe more of a traditional behind the scenes role. Although anybody that has known me knows I'm definitely not a behind the scenes person, but a lot of CFOs sort of play more of that accounting and finance role. And I've seen my role really change. The other thing is that, I've always believed that one of the major responsibilities of the CFO is to promote stability within the organization. And so I continually work on building trust with employees and investors through open, honest, and clear communication, which has become ever so important during this time. And then the last thing I'll say is that for my role in particular at AttackIQ, since I also run HR, there's been a large shift in terms of managing talent with the transition from an in-person office culture to a work from home culture. So I personally spend a significant amount of my time focused on employee engagement and how to keep our employees feeling connected now that we are fully remote in the US. And so we must have a continuous communication loop and collaborate as a team as often as we can.
And do you think the value of cybersecurity investments have never been more critical? And presuming that you obviously do think this, are boardrooms buying into this message now? Because I think that's so important, isn't it? And traditionally, they've been accused of not paying attention, but I think that is changing. But what are you seeing?
So I would say for the first part of your question, 100%. Every day you pull up your browser, you see that there's another article posted about yet another organization that's been breached. So it's absolutely critical that every organization makes cybersecurity a top priority and then allocates the appropriate budget to ensure that it's properly protected. And for your second question regarding boardrooms, well, all I can say is that I hope boardrooms are buying into this message because it's good for AttackIQ. But in all seriousness, if your board is not concerned about cybersecurity, they absolutely should be.
100% with you there. And what about the different roles of CISO, CTO, and CFO? Can they work together to understand how effectively they detect, alert, and block threats? Is that something that you're seeing more and more, that they can come together and tackle the problem together rather than different silos?
Absolutely. So I believe the CFO's role is to enable a CISO or an organization, if there is no CISO, through the financial planning process. We can work together to make sure that we allocate the appropriate resources and budget dollars to protect the company from cybersecurity risks. I also believe that we can work with CISOs, to prioritize, effectively by connecting security risks to the bottom line. And that also helps CISOs to determine which cybersecurity measures best service the company's current and future needs and interests. And then finally, I would say that I do believe that the CFO can help shape a security-minded culture so that all employees, executives, and the board consider cybersecurity a top priority. And so working together with the CISO, this can be achieved.
And so much has changed in the last 15 to 18 months. Are there any other trends that you're seeing in the industry, especially from the conversations you're having with so many different customers?
Absolutely. And in all honesty, I pay a lot of attention not only to what our customers are telling us, but to what the experts are saying. And I mainly rely on Gartner for that. But, Gartner says that cybersecurity spend is going to increase 12.4% this year. $150 billion is being spent on cybersecurity. What I particularly like is that cloud security is expected to grow at the fastest rate ever. And that means, again, good things for AttackIQ. And one of the other trends we are seeing from customers, and Gartner has mentioned it as well, is that breach and attack simulation, which is what AttackIQ does, is one of the top 10 security and risk trends for 2021. So that's just another good data point for AttackIQ as well.
And I appreciate you probably can't share too much, but looking forward from here, what is your big focus at AttackIQ for the next 18 months? Is there anything else you can share about that road ahead and where you're going to be focusing most?
Sure. I can talk about two big areas of focus. The first one going into what's going to be 2022 is creating a flexible business model. So you may have seen we just recently raised $44 million in our Series C financing, but there's still a ton of uncertainty surrounding when things will return to, I hate to say it, but normal. Yeah. And that requires a model that can adapt to a changing environment. And that's whether it's positive or negative. So that is definitely a big area of focus for me. The other area is people. So, as we've gone 100% remote in the US, helping lead this process has really transformed my role, and it's going to continue in the next 18 months. I'm heavily focused on rethinking employee engagement, ways to keep employees feeling connected while we're being remote, and also collaborating with two very large teams in both Spain and Argentina. And this just isn't current employees, it's also the entire recruitment process. And if COVID has taught me anything, it's that companies need to find creative ways to keep employees motivated and make them still feel like they're part of a team when we can't all be together. So people is probably the second biggest area of focus for me in the coming months.
Exciting times ahead. It'd be great to get you back on next year and find out how that journey is continuing to evolve. But we started today's conversation talking about your origin story and how those worlds collided. But I'm now going to ask you, what was the soundtrack to that story? Was there a particular song or piece of music that has accompanied you on your tech career? Or maybe just helps you get your head in the zone before going on stage or going in a big meeting? I asked this question to every guest, and then we add the song and story to our Spotify playlists. But what would your song be and why?
So I hope this doesn't sound silly, but I don't have a song per se, but I do have a mantra that I use both personally and professionally. I'm not sure if you've ever seen the movie Finding Nemo.
Yes.
But I have two daughters who are now 19 and 16. But back when they were younger, they love that movie. I must have watched it over 100 times. So there's this scene where Martin, Nemo's dad, is starting to think he will never find Nemo. And Dory sings a song that repeats, just keep swimming, just keep swimming. So it may sound a little bit funny, but that is what I use in my head whenever I'm getting prepared for something. Not the swimming part, obviously, but the just keep part. It could be a word, just keep a word, or just keep doing whatever it is that I'm doing.
Absolutely love that. For a moment, I thought you were going to shout shark bait. So I'm glad you did. Well, I've loved chatting with you today. But before I let you go, for anyone wanting to find out more information about anything we've talked about, look up AttackIQ and the work that you're doing. What's the best starting point now?
So you can reach me on LinkedIn or Danielle. My email is danielle.murcray@attackiq.com, and our company website's www.attackiq.com.
Fantastic. And I'll add those links to the show notes so people can find you nice and easily. It's been a fascinating conversation for me today, and learning more about how that CISO, CTO and CFO can work together and the boardroom are buying in. And it's so refreshing to hear this. But more than anything, just thank you for sharing your story with me today, Danielle.
Great. Thank you so much.
I cannot thank Danielle enough for certainly getting me thinking differently about the role of the CFO, and proving the value of cybersecurity investments has never been more critical, and how that CISO, CTO and CFO can and should be working together to understand how effectively they're detecting, alerting and blocking threats. But I'm curious, did anything that we've talked about today resonate with you, your business, how you operate? Is the boardroom seeing value in cybersecurity? I would hope that they would, but I want to hear your stories and experiences direct from the front line, and we can share them on here and hopefully learn a thing or two together. So please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk, and you get me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, @Neil C. Hughes. But as I always say, don't just hit follow. Say hello. Tell me you listen to the podcast, and we'll start a conversation too. Other than that, I'll return again tomorrow with another episode. So a big thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.